So hello and welcome. This is the very beginning session on your fiscal policy. As we started the concept of public finance, we started with one particular quantitative theory called as the Fisher's quantity theory of money. And in that, we started with the equation that was, all of you are aware, I hope, that price into quantity is equal to money supply into money velocity. We talked about those individual terms, right? We elaborately discussed about on the left hand side, it is all about your supply side. On the right hand side of the equation, that's your money velocity into money supply. That is somewhat, we can say, it's the demand side of the economy, and that is very well managed so far as it is very well managed in India by the central bank, because that side is the monetary policy. Today we'll keep our focus. We are in fact going to talk about the left side of the equation, or that is price into quantity. We have talked at length about them in the national income classes, but today we are going to make our concern, or we'll be pinpointing things to one particular agent of the economy. All of you know this. Anyone who takes up an economic activity, or somebody who decides the allocation of one particular resource into different ways so that it maximizes the utility, accordingly we have classified three kind of economic agents. First one is an individual, the other one is a company. If you include these individual and company, we call them in group, actually we call them as a private sector, right? For example, any individual producing something or any company producing anything, so we club them together and we categorically say that that's the private sector. Today we'll talk more about the public sector. That means India, or in fact India being a developing country, or even the countries which are very well developed, you can think of United States or something else also. uh, though it is a generally perceived idea that government should not be into business, but since time immemorial, government have been playing a very major role in economic activities, and the management of the governmental system itself, right, it plays a very important role. So we are not going to the deeper areas of economics, like defining when does government need to get into business and all. So let's keep it very simple. Government is also a part of the economic activity, because the governmental budget, governmental finances are so huge that it needs a proper management. And this particular session, it might be a class, it might be a series of 2 or 3 classes even, because at the end we'll also talk about the very recent budget of this particular year. But before getting into the details of this particular budget of 2021-22, let us understand what exactly is budget, why it is meant, right? What do we exactly do in a budget? We will keep our classes, we'll keep our classes particularly in the way, please do not send any chats, all of you, right? So we'll talk about something. We'll keep our focus particularly how government finances are managed. Why do we need a budget? Let's start with this particular question. I would love to get answers from you all, right? Because budget is not very new to all. All of you have at least a certain basic level of understanding that yes, there is something, a very big affair of government is a budget. Why do we need a budget actually? Any one of you would like to answer? And since you have been attending classes, now you can define it very precisely, because you know that Fisher's quantity theory of money, the left side of the equation dictates all the terms of your fiscal policy. Yes, please, any one of you. Why do we need a budget actually?
Sir, it is used how to spend money over a particular period of time.
Yes. Do we simply talk about how to spend money, or even we talk about our receipts also?
Receipts also.
Okay. Okay, fine. That's a very important point, that we need to make a proper plan, right? We need to have a prior planning before things come and go out of us. We need to have a proper plan so that we maximize benefit out of whatever we are receiving, or we should maximize the utility in anything that we are spending upon. Clear? Next, any one of you, anybody else's?
Sir, it's like in Fisher equation, we have PQ is equal to MV.
Yeah.
Yeah, budget deals with the supply side of the equation.
Yes.
Even if you think a nation has a family, just like a family has a family, like whatever the income and whatever the expenditure,
Yes.
Just like we have a family budget, in a macro level, it is the same for the country, whatever it is.
Yes, this is perhaps the one of the very simplest and very pragmatic answer, right? Budget is nothing other than your right. You when you plan in your family level. For example, forget about your family. Many of you might be staying in hostels or somewhere outside, out of the family. You either you are earning already or you sustain yourself out of your right household income. For example, your dad sends you 10,000 rupees, right? You have a fixed budget, right? I'll be getting 10,000 rupees. I need to spend 5,000 on my foods and travel. I need to spend 2,000 on my books, 3,000 on something else. So you make a plan, right? The month, think of that particular month wherein you have to incur certain, right, unplanned expenses, for example, right? It becomes literally very tough for you to manage that particular month. Either you need to get extra funds, or you get a loan from someone, or you are forced to stop that particular thing that you were bound to spend, for example. Clear? So if you plan properly, the thing is, economics is a science of maximization. All of you know this. It is just not optimization, actually. It is a science of maximization, rather, I would say. So with very scarce amount of resources, whatever you have, you try to get the maximum benefit out of it. And for that purpose, when do you benefit? Only when you plan. There is this very familiar saying: if you are not planning, then you are, if you fail to plan, then you are planning to fail, right? So it that particular proverb or whatever you say, it ensembles the importance of budgeting. So budget is nothing other than a plan, actually. A plan about with very meager amount of resources, because right, the very definition of resources has become, it has jot down to be scarce resource, whether they are natural resources or government finances. Everywhere there are constants, and because of this increasing governmental expenditure, now the government finances are very much, you can say, they are very much constrained. So we need to have a very proper plan. In fact, a government which plans its expenditure or its revenue resources very well, it gives you the maximum possible societal outcome. So this is how the general view about a budget. It is nothing other than planning with some little bit of resources. You plan to maximize something. So from the macro perspective, right, if you think about a country or a state, right, so what could be the maximum possible outcome? What could be the best possible or most desirable outcome? People are well off, yes or no? Ultimately, people need to be well off. And when I say people need to be well off, it becomes a multi-dimensional concept, right? Because people have different needs. You have certain societal needs which need to have, right, dedicated investment into the social infrastructure. People have to have a very, we can say, very fulfilling life. You need to live the life with dignity, with all the materials that you need to dignify your life also, even. So this is how the concept of budget, it has grown its importance, right? The concept, or the you can say the action, or the entire entire activity of the budget has grown its prominence just because of this thing, because the government finances are getting larger, and the larger they are, the more constant they are. Clear? Now let me share you with a presentation, right? I'll be switching to a tablet mode. So if you have any concern, please do not send any chats. Straightforward, you can speak it out. And again, you can go back to the mute mode. Next, I'm sharing a presentation. Yes, please.
Sir, ये जो fiscal policy है, does this only include budget, और जैसे last year आत्मनिर्भर 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 आया था, तो will that also be included in fiscal policy, because वो भी तो एक तरह का
बिल्कुल yes. All your doubts relating to that, what Pratyut is asking, sir, does fiscal policy mean simply the budget or something else is also? Are you getting it? Understand this particular thing. Fiscal policy is just not about budget, actually. It is a wider thing. Instrument, the most often used instrument to execute any fiscal policy is the budget. But it doesn't completely covers the entire domain of fiscal policy. There are many other things which might come at certain point of time. See, every time it cannot be just relating to finance even. Are you getting it? You might imbibe a qualitative aspect into spending, for example. Think of, I'm giving a very small example wherein you can relate. For example, you rate different districts and states on the basis of something. And the budget has, or for example, out of the budget even, you have provisioned some amount of reward. And the rewards are financial, for example. Swachh Bharat Mission, any state that is performing beyond these parameters would be incentivized on this particular aspect. So this is off the budget, right? But this is a fiscal policy, right? Because expenditure is happening and automatically it's into the right fiscal policy. Are you getting it? So that might not be mentioned in the budget even. Clear? So fiscal policy is a wider area, and budget is, you can say, it's around, if I give you a quantitative figure, it's not very exact actually. I'm just giving you a view. It is around, right, 80-90% of the fiscal policy is covered within the budget, but there are certain off budget expenses. Expense means fiscal policy. Are you getting it? So now let's start with the presentation. I hope the screen is visible to all of you.
Yes, sir.
Clear. So no more charts, please.
Sir,
if you
one
have
last
any
question.
Yes, please go ahead.
सर लास्ट क्वेश्चन सर, जैसे आरबीआई का भी कुछ निकलता है, जैसे 15,000 करोड़ का जो सर्विस कॉन्ट्रैक्टर इंटेंसिव सेक्टर को जो लोन था, कि मतलब तुम लोग जितना लोन दोगे बैंक्स का था कि उतना आप लोग रेपो रेट में रिवर्स रेपो रेट में रख सकते हैं, वो सब जो था, तो इज दैट मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी, क्योंकि आरबीआई बना रहा है, तो मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी में जाएगा या फिर वो फिस्कल पॉलिसी में जाएगा?
Yes. Anyone would love to answer? I will answer to this particular question, but any one of you would attempt to answer this thing? For example, very recently, all of you know, Reserve Bank of India introduced certain measures to increase the liquidity in the contact-intensive industry, like spas, hotels, and all. Very recent, right? So, what Pratyut is asking, sir, though these are kind of expenditure or something, but is it like this? I mean, what I say, is it like this that we should include this into monetary policy, or should we include it into your what you say? What I mean is fiscal policy.
Sir, fiscal policy, because they said that it is regards to MSME and all these things.
Okay.
So MSME and all this comes under supply side of the equation.
Okay.
I think it should be monetary because it's basically dealing with the liquidity aspect. और हम लोग इसमें मतलब डायरेक्ट एक्सपेंडिचर मतलब गवर्नमेंट का कुछ नहीं हो रहा है, मतलब इसमें एक तरह से आरबीआई ही लिक्विडिटी बढ़ाने कमाने का काम कर रहा है, तो उस सेंस में अगर देखेंगे तो ये मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी में जाना चाहिए.
Okay. Fine. Okay. Let me clarify this thing. Clear? The increase in the liquidity, for example, whenever there is an increase in the liquidity, clear? What Reserve Bank did, think of it. It simply provided some amount of loan, some very cheaper loan, or they could recast the loan for a longer tenure or something like that. It is not spending actually. When you increase the liquidity, it is not about what I say, it is not increasing the spending actually. Are you getting it? It is simply a portion of the monetary policy. Reserve Bank is not going to spend. They are providing you with liquidity. So it is within the purview of monetary policy, not fiscal policy. Got it, Venkat?
Yes, sir.
Clear. So now let's go to the topic. The word fiscal means something that is related to public money or taxes. Clear. So whenever you read this particular word, fiscal, it relates to public money or taxes. Fiscal policy is an estimate of the taxation and government spending that impacts the economy. Clear? So when I say fiscal policy, or whenever you read anything relating to fiscal, it is every time it combines two particular things. One is the taxes through which the government earns, and the expenditure in all aspects wherein the government spends. Is that clear to all of you?
Yes, sir.
You got it?
Yes, sir.
Now, it was the concept of budgeting, or what you say, your fiscal policy. This was introduced by John Maynard Keynes. All of you know him. He is perhaps the most revered classical economist. He is the first economist who developed the theory of linking fiscal policy to the economic performance. And the thing that I avoided to talk about is that we are not going that deeper into when do we need to have that push by the government, right? It's a theory actually. You don't have to get that much into this from your exam point of view. You don't have to get into that. So understand, he only proposed the concept called as fiscal policy, that the governmental expenditure can be a trigger for economic growth, and the economic performance is also linked to fiscal policy. He established this linkage actually. Next, the learning objective of this particular series of classes, which we will be taking 2 to 3 classes maybe, is that, let me read out what are the things that we are going to cover in this session. First is the objectives of the fiscal policy in any country. Second, we'll talk about the types and tools of executing the fiscal policy. What are the different types of fiscal policy and what are the different tools through which, just as in case of a monetary policy, right, we talked about the different tools like LA for open market operation. Likewise, in case of your fiscal policy, what are the different tools that we can use or the government generally use. Second is your objectives, importance of the fiscal policy in India. We'll talk something very specific to India. What are the various objectives of budget in India and what are their importance? How importance means, we'll talk about how it impacts the economy. Next, we'll talk about the similarities and difference between monetary policy and fiscal policy. What are their linkages and what are the differences? Next, we'll talk about the public expenditure and receipts by the government. Next, we'll talk about the ways and means and advances. This is something called as WMA, something very interesting that we'll cover during the topic. We'll also talk about the nature of government budget, the components of a budget in detail, wherein we'll go for certain accounting calculation to establish something called as deficit. We'll talk about something called as balanced, surplus and deficit budget. We'll talk about various deficits which you generally see in your exams, like fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, or effective revenue deficit and all that. Next, we'll go to the types of budget in India. What are the different essence that is imbibed into the budgeting process of India? Measures of the government deficit, which I just discussed. We'll talk about the current situation or the historical situation of the public debt in India. How much loan has the government of India is into and what has been the historical trend. Next, we'll talk about a very important act, FRBM Act 2003, that actually limits the unnecessary expenditure that generally, because you will see, if you talk about this particular equation, right, price into quantity is equal to money velocity into your, right, money supply, generally it is assumed that the fiscal policy is generally expansionary. It is generally perceived, and it is also seen, it can simply be proved that generally government tries to spend more. They have a tendency of spending more to keep its citizens happy so that they keep on getting the votes. Whereas monetary policy is generally considered to be somewhat conservative or contractionary. It is a generally perceived idea, and you would reinforce these particular understanding or these ideas or this essence only when you follow your news item and everything. You generally see many a times, right, there is generally a kind of conflict between the central bank of a country and the government of the country. The same particular country, Reserve Bank of India, वो Reserve Bank of India है, थोड़ी पाकिस्तान है. लेकिन अब many times you see news of conflict between the government and the central bank. Why is it so? It is because the monetary policy and the fiscal policy, they are the both sides of the same coin. And generally, fiscal policy tends to be expansionary, whereas monetary policy tries to balance the unnecessary expansion created in the spending of the government. Next is about the tax reforms. We'll talk about how the indirect tax and direct tax reform currently what is underway. We'll specifically talk about the GST that is perceived to be one of the biggest, or in the history of economy of India, perhaps 10 out of 10 major reforms that was very recently listed by State Bank Research. GST plays one of the very prominent role. We'll talk about that in detail, how you can say how the regime of indirect taxation in India changed because of this GST. VAT was a successful one, but why we had to migrate into GST and what are the issues relating to GST. We'll also talk about black money. We'll also talk about, right, how the rail budget was merged into the common budget. Earlier, before 2016, there used to be a different rail budget, but the current dispensation in the first session or the first government NDA, the pehla season 2014 to 19 tha, they merged that railway budget into the consolidated budget of India. So this is the view, or these are the topics or areas which we'll talk about in this particular session. So let us go or try to cover as much as possible. First, the fiscal policy in India, and let's talk about the types, tools, and objectives. What are the different types? The objective of fiscal policy of a country are as follows, and they are like this. To ensure that the primary objective of any country, it is not just about India. Whenever a country goes for execution of the fiscal policy, right, the primary objectives are, it is of like this: to ensure that the expenditure in an economy in terms of the national priorities to boost growth for the welfare of the people. This is the first primary objective of fiscal policy. Next is expenditure being incurred, it should not lead to price rise or kind of inflation. Right? The objective of the fiscal policy is that the expenditure that the government is incurring should not lead to unnecessary inflation. Should be efficient, or it should be in an efficient way of resources that are raised and spent. That means the process of raising money by the government or the receipts of the government and in spending money, there should be a good level of efficiency. Efforts have to be made to avoid wasteful expenditure in the economy. Resources being raised by the government through taxes should not create burden on the common man. We'll also touch upon the 3 or the 4 major canons of taxation. Canon means top nahi hote, it's not canon, CANON, right? So that means the principles of taxation. We'll also talk about them while discussing regarding tax. So this should be, the tax levied should be in a way so that it doesn't become a burden on the common man. And that for that, in case of your direct taxation in India, we are trying to go for the best possible option. That's called your progressive taxation. We'll talk about them in detail. The taxation should be just and helpful in reducing the income inequalities. So these are the objectives that need to be taken care while formulating the fiscal policy of any country. And generally, all the countries, they keep touch with these all points while framing the fiscal policies. Next, the policy should aim for overall improvement and the welfare of the economy. So this is not just about India, it is about any country. Whoever is gonna execute the fiscal policy, he is or she is, right, any government, they keep these points in the mind. Is that clear to all of you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Next, let's come to India. So the main objective of the fiscal policy in India, these three have been the primary objective of economic policy, or you can say fiscal policy in India. First being the economic growth. Automatically, whenever government spends, then it aims at achieving economic growth. The second is price stability. It spends in a way so that it doesn't lead to inflation, rather it helps in stabilizing the price levels. Third is full employment. Whenever there is expenditure, some people get in employment. Automatically, we all know expenditure of one becomes the income of the other. While going for the 3 methods of calculating national income, you saw one thing. In the factor income method, expenditure of one becomes the income of the different factors of production. So these are the 3 primary objectives of fiscal policy in India. So you can compare these 2 slides, and this is a very more refined or very specific to India actually. Next, the importance of fiscal policy in India. What is the importance of fiscal policy? In these points, we'll talk about how fiscal policy triggers the Indian economy. Fiscal policy plays a key role in elevating the rate of capital formation, both in the public as well as in the private sector. So it helps in capital formation or increasing the rate of capital formation through capital expenditures. Through taxation, the fiscal policy helps mobilize considerable number of resources for financing the government's projects. Fiscal policy also helps in providing stimulus to elevate the savings rate. So see, these all things, right? Savings rate, capital formation, right? Resource mobilization. So how important is fiscal policy in India? Just imagine. Almost all major drivers of an economy are being catered to by this fiscal policy. Monetary policy automatically impacts, but fiscal policy has that multifaceted approach that it can tick upon multiple number of objectives that actually helps in driving the economy forward. And while discussing your monetary policy, I talked about one particular issue. Monetary policy helps in outcome of one particular aspect of the economy, and that is widespread. That's the income, or sorry, that's the interest. The overall interest rate of an economy is managed by the monetary policy, whereas fiscal policy, though it is not very all pervasive, but it can touch upon all the specific needs of the economy. And you see, these all indicators like your savings rate, resource mobilization, your capital formation, then you can think of giving adequate incentive to the private sector, fiscal policy to minimize the imbalance in the dispersal of income and wealth. So wealth inequality or your regional disparity, these all things can be touched upon, and the fiscal policy has the ability to solve these issues. So you can now very well understand why it is as important as monetary policy. And these are the outcomes that any country would love to have. And that's why we need to have a proper and very well managed fiscal policy. And इसी के लिए you see a lot of halla gulla, whatever you see in the budget, during the budget session, you see a lot of noise in the parliament and the news channels. And it is all because of this. Let me just make you aware why there is a lot of conflict or confusion while formation of the budget, because distributing or allocating one particular amount of resource into multiple things, it is very subjective. For you, something might be more important than the other, so you would automatically allocate more amount of resources therein. But for somebody else's, that might be least important or less important. So this is how this area of allocation of resources is very normative, and since this being a normative procedure, we see a lot of conflict or diatribe, whatever you can say. Okay, so these are the theoretical aspect or the foundational blocks that helps you understand what exactly, why do we go for a budget actually. Next, I would say the types of fiscal policy. In India or in any part of the world, you generally see fiscal policy is of two types, and it is equally the same like your monetary policy. First one is your expansionary fiscal policy, that means government tends to spend more. Next is contractionary fiscal policy, that means government tries to reduce its unnecessary expenditure, and this is what we call as your fiscal, we call this generally also fiscal consolidation also, we say at times. It is not very similar with consolidation, but yes, fiscal consolidation is also a symptom of a more rational fiscal policy, or else we can say, we cannot say it exactly as your contractionary fiscal policy, but yes, fiscal consolidation leads to a more rationalization of the fiscal policy. Got it? I hope all of you could cover this, understand this. If you have any concern, you can raise it right away. Any one of you, do you have any doubt?
So rationalization means in the what sense you are saying that rationalization of fiscal policy?
See, whenever I say consolidation, what do? We try to get resources out of one unproductive thing. Got it? So when you are pulling out some amount of resource from an unproductive thing, that means you are now left with more amount of resource to deploy into a productive activity. This is called as consolidation. Clear? In this term, in this sense, I told it is about rationalizing.
So you mean like disinvestment, all these things are a rationalization of fiscal policy?
Yes, if that's the priority. If government thinks we are running a PSU which is not within our capacity, or it is not doing really well, then it is better to sell off. Think of Air India. Right, very small example. There could be right difference of views, but if you think, yeah, I have deployed some of my resources wherein I am not getting the desired outcome, better to get my resources out of there. I have many other options wherein I can deploy. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Next. Just like we talked about the tools of monetary policy, there are certain tools of fiscal policy, and broadly, just as in case of monetary policy, we talked about your LF and open market operation. Likewise, in fiscal policy, you have two major tools. One is your taxation, the other one is government spending, or we call this technically also as appropriation. Appropriation means expenditure. Clear? So one of the tool of fiscal policy is taxing or taxation, through which government receives money, and the other instrument of executing fiscal policy is government expenditure or government spending, or we generally call this as an appropriation. Clear? So these are the two major tools. You got it? So you can trigger or you can get a desired outcome in the fiscal policy either by the taxation or by the spending or by combination of both. We'll see all this flexible combination while discussing the account book of a budget. Next, let us now, we have discussed much about the basics of your fiscal policy and monetary policy. Now let us try to understand what are the various similarities within them and what are the differences, major differences. Both monetary policy and fiscal policy are macroeconomic tools used to manage or stimulate the economy. Yes, obviously, both of them are intended for the same. Both aim at creating a more stable economy characterized by low inflation and positive economic growth. Third one is both fiscal and monetary policy are an attempt to reduce the economic fluctuations and smooth out the economic cycle. Got it? So these are the three major similarities or the purpose similarity behind your monetary policy and fiscal policy. Next, if you talk about the differences, monetary policy is concerned with the management of the interest rate of the economy and the total supply of money in circulation. It is generally carried out by the Reserve Bank, whereas fiscal policy on the other hand estimates the taxation, government spending. It should ideally be in line with the monetary policy, but since it is created by the lawmakers, people interest often take precedence over growth. This is a very gray area, right? People's interest, that means what people want, it gets more reflected in the budget because it is created by the lawmakers. So growth perspective, right? There might be, you can say, if you see a budget, every time anybody can suggest a better budget. What does that mean? The actual budget that get passed or that get tabled in the parliament, it can have a better format every time. You cannot say this is perhaps the best possible because this is a very subjective or a normative area. The best thing for you could be not that the very best for somebody else's. This is the thing. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Sir, I have a doubt. Like before in
Yes.
one budget,
Yes.
they brought this mudra loans. I think you remember.
Yes.
So now can you say that mudra loans is a part of monetary policy? Because just like before you said our example that RBI 16,000 crores, it is same as that, no? Like both are same examples.
Yes. It increased the liquidity. It made the small loans very easier, right?
Yes.
But
So can we call?
no, we cannot call actually because there is something. Government had to spend money to give the guarantee. Do you know? There is a Mudra Bank. Refinancing
Yes.
corpus was created. So it's an expenditure for the government also. Got it?
Okay.
So in
So
that sense,
it's like the question is like who is going to spend it? Suppose the government is spending, then it is fiscal. If the money is coming from RBI, then it is monetary.
yes, government, Reserve Bank generally never spends. It simply increases the liquidity. Okay.
Okay.
Reserve Bank spends in welfare of its staffs, acquiring assets and all that.
Yeah, but in Mudra loan, because the government is providing the guarantee.
Guarantee, yes. And that guarantee corpus of 1 lakh crore was an expenditure for the government, and hence it should be treated as a part of the fiscal policy.
Okay, sir.
Clear? So you don't have to very clearly differentiate actually, because see, the guarantee corpus was provided by the government, and it helped in multiplying the money or the credit forward, yes or no? And because of this guarantee, the money supply increased. So it's a transactional business actually. Somebody is giving the guarantee, and hence that becomes the fiscal part. And because of that guarantee, since there is a refinancing guarantee, right, increase in the credit offtake is happening, and it is increasing the money supply. Understand? Part role is played by the government, and a part of that is played by the Reserve Bank. And there was nothing relating to Reserve Bank actually in Mudra law. Reserve Bank was not at all involved in Mudra Bank, in this Mudra scheme. It was purely by the government. There was no role of Reserve Bank in Mudra Bank actually. Clear? Next, let's go first. Yes.
Hello. So there's a collection of fee and fines by the government. So that will be considered as tools under the fiscal policy, sir?
They are all revenue receipts actually. We'll talk about them individually, don't worry.
Okay.
Clear? Yes, it is fiscal. It is fiscal. Because government is receiving, so it's fiscal. Okay, we'll talk about the heads of different receipts. Therein we'll talk about what exactly is capital receipt, what is the revenue receipt and all that. Clear? So next, let us go to, it is just not about management. In fact, the Constitution of India mandates that there has to be a budget process. And that is why we run the entire show in Parliament. Clear? There is article number 112 that says the President of India, in respect of every financial year, cost to be laid, the budget needs to be laid down before the Parliament. And in fact, very interesting, हम इतना बार budget of word we use, most commonly we use the word budget, but the word budget is missing from the Indian Constitution. In place of budget, it is called as AFS, or we call that as your annual financial statement. There is no word in the Constitution of India as budget. It is article 112 wherein annual financial statement. Got it? Remember this thing. So article 112 mandates that the president should, right, cause the parliament to lay down the budget before beginning of or before the commencement of a financial year. And there are two more articles in the Constitution of India, 265 and 266, very, very important. What exactly 265 says? It says that no tax shall be levied or collected except by authority of law. That means there is nobody in this country who can collect a tax other than an authority created by law. Other than any legal authority, nobody can collect a tax. And exactly same is the case of your expenditure. What exactly Article 266 says? It says that no expenditure can be incurred except with the authorization of the legislature. Got it? That means what? Nobody can tax other than the authority created by law, and not a single penny can be spent from the government account other than prior authorization. That means in order to spend 1 rupee from the government account, you need to have prior authorization. You got it? And what exactly budget do you know? The budget is that application for prior authorization and taxation. That means the ruling government or the government proposes a bill, a set of bills that dictates these are the tax that will be levying on people, and these are the expenditure or the areas wherein we will be spending this money. This is the application before the parliament, which is voted with majority. If it gets passed, they become law, and hence it becomes legal. So this process of getting the prior approval to tax and to spend out of the government of India's account, that procedure is called your budget. Now I hope you are a little bit more clear. And there are certain small articles. That article number 113, it says for demand for grants. Article appropriation bill, article number 114, sub-article 3, finance bill 110, sub-article A. Clear? So these are the articles generally that you need to remember, because they also are equally important for your exam point of view, and these articles give a legal foundation to the budgeting mechanism. Next. Now there is something very interesting. You need to understand this thing very well. We will be talking about 3 more articles, and it is a very interesting thing that you should be knowing actually, because we are going to talk about the logic behind the budgeting process in India. What exactly is the logic? Why do we go for a budget? These 2 articles, I hope, gave you a basic brief understanding that we need to mandatorily have a budget. Without a budget, neither we can tax someone, neither the government can tax someone, neither the government can spend a single penny out of the government deposits. You got it? So think of a situation, if the budget is not passed, not a single rupee can be spent from the government account. Do you think government can maintain without spending a single rupee? We have a lot of essential services. Forget about investment and infrastructure. We have a lot of essential services that the government needs to provide uninterruptedly. And that's why we need to have a prior permission. Clear? Next. Government of India particularly has 3 accounts. Government of India has 3 accounts, and they are all legally accounts. They are mandated by the Constitution of India. Let us understand what are they and what is the role played by these different accounts. Why not a single account? Why 3 different accounts? The very first account is called as the Consolidated Fund of India. The Consolidated Fund of India falls under the purview of Article 266, Sub-Article 1. Got it? All the Consolidated Fund of India, there is a mistake actually, non-tax revenue is written here, it's a mistake. Almost all major revenues of Government of India gets credited into this account. So this is the primary account of India. Clear? All major receipts of the government or the expenditure of the government happens from this particular account. That account is called as your Consolidated Fund of India, or in short we write this as CFI. Next, there is something called as Contingency Fund of India, Article 267(1). This is the emergency fund, because you see why we need to maintain a contingency fund and what is the purpose of this particular account. Understand this thing. Think of an emergency situation, just like there is some earthquake somewhere, there is some very severe flood somewhere. You cannot convene the entire parliament to pass on a bill to get money used, because without the permission of the parliament, you cannot use a single rupee. And therein, you need to convene the parliament. And if there is an emergency situation, there is one particular account and some amount of money is kept in exigency actually. Contingency means emergency. So that can be readily used by one executive authority, that is the signature of the President of India. Simply President of India can authorize the expenditure from this Contingency Fund of India. But yes, there is a limitation. That Contingency Fund of India needs to be refilled within 6 months period. You can make use of that money, but once you are using it, you need to refill again within a period of 6 months, because there could be future contingencies. Got it? Now, the third account is called as your public account. Now, let me make you understand what is the primary difference between Consolidated Fund of India and public accounts. This particular difference will give the way for you to understand why there has to be a budget and why the budgeting mechanism is such a tedious process. Public account is that particular account wherein money gets credited when the Government of India plays the role of a banker. When the government plays the role of a banker, then it collects money from people. It is playing the role of a banker. Clear? In that particular case, that money needs to be deposited, and all that money is deposited in public account. So whatever you see your employee provident fund, general provident fund, PF, and all contributions that you make, all governmental contributions that you make, that get credited to these public accounts. Got it? Now, the cream of this particular discussion. Think of which particular account. Is it consolidated fund of India, or it is public fund of public account which has an automatic, understand this thing very properly, which has an automatic repayment obligation? Tell me, which of these account out of this public account and consolidated fund of India, which account has an automatic repayment obligation? That means what? If money is being spent out of that, that has to be repaid back any day.
Public account.
Automatically the public account, yes or no?
Yes,
You are
sir.
depositing your money into your PF account. So when you demand that money has to be repaid automatically. Clear? So now you tell me, but any money that is spent out of consolidated fund of India, it doesn't have to be repaid back. Then now tell me, we need to be more careful about which account. We need to be, or the government need to be more careful about expenditure from which account?
Public account.
Not public accounts. Why? You know, whenever government spends out of public account, it is careful because it knows I have to repay back. Are you getting it?
Yes, yes, sir. Yeah.
So we need to take all the precautions, while we need to be very watchful or very vigilant when the government is spending from the consolidated fund of India. Got it now? Got the logic? Because there is no repayment obligation. Today, Mr. Modi is spending somewhere. Tomorrow, Mr. Rahul Gandhi cannot become the Prime Minister and tell, Ki Modi Babu, you spend in all these things, please refund that money. You wasted that money. It doesn't happen so. Got it? So, we need to be extremely vigilant while dealing with this consolidated fund of India, because there is no repayment obligation. And that is why we do a hell-bent of debate that happens in Parliament during the budget, because most of the money is deposited or kept in this consolidated fund of India, and it doesn't have any repayment obligation. Got it?
Sir, how does the contingency fund of India get filled?
From this consolidated fund of India.
Okay.
Okay, once you are making use of that, that has to be filled in the next budgetary provision from the consolidated fund of India only. Got it?
Next to budgetary provision.
Yes, you need to make budgetary provision, and that might be an interim budgetary provision also.
Okay.
If something is going out of consolidated fund of India, that has to be provisioned by the Parliament, yes or no?
Okay, okay.
So that has to be a budgetary provision automatically.
Okay, okay.
Clear? Can somebody tell me what is the current corpus allowed for this contingency fund of India?
500 crore.
30,000 crores.
Sorry?
30,000 crores.
It was 500 crore, Tejoshini, okay? Currently, it is 30,000 crores because the expenditure is growing. Got it? 30,000 crore.
Yes, sir.
You read generally textbooks which are somewhat outdated. When you take up the budget this particular year, you would see it is 30,000 crore. Clear? Got it? So this is about, I hope at least, forget about the accounting, those calculation, kya aata hai, kya nahi aata hai, but at least you have a basic foundational understanding ki why do we need to go for a budget? Just not foundational understanding. Now you have the legal prerogatives also. Are you getting it? So we'll be summing up the class today right away. Tomorrow morning we will also join again to continue this particular session. Okay. So I hope all of you could understand, all of you could follow this lecture. Tomorrow we'll talk about two important aspects. That is, today we talked about the legal aspect or the framework aspect of a budget. What is the objective, what is needed, what is legally allowed, what is not allowed, what all are legal standings, and what is the management aspect of the budget. Tomorrow we'll deal with very conceptual and very, we can say very quantitative things. We'll talk about the accounting aspect of budget tomorrow. And in the next class, we'll talk about the budget of 2021. We'll see about some very recent, we can say recent happenings. We'll talk about how have we been reforming our budgeting or fiscal policy over the years, right? We'll talk about GST and all. And at the end, we'll talk about the current budget, that is 2021 and 22. So hope you all liked it. I'll be uploading this session, no issues. If you have missed anything, you can revise from there only. Thank you. That's all for today. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye, sir.